Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. We've got Andy and Brad here ready to talk about how to accelerate value delivery using Path to Agility. We're going to go into some key Agile outcomes and capabilities that are critical to expediting and facilitating value delivery for your teams. And Brad is going to share some really great case studies and client stories on his end to make it really come to life here. Just a quick note, we have time for Q&A, so we'll do that at the end. But if you have questions already brewing in your mind throughout the presentation, go ahead and use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your webinar screen. Or if you have additional Agile jokes, please go ahead and share those with the group as well. That being said, I will turn it over to Andy and Brad.
Thank you, Rosalind. I am not a great joke teller. I am a pragmatic Agile coach. I'm also a recovering project manager. I still have nightmares about that iron triangle. What brings me joy these days is helping teams of teams. We call them systems, and systems of systems. We call it organizations along their path of continuous improvement. And I love to see the resiliency and creativity and authenticity show up in the workplace. Brad.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me here. I consider myself a leadership coach, an organizational coach. And like Andy, I just love to see when organizations get on that path of continuous improvement and the never-ending journey towards becoming as close as you can to perfect. You realize you never can get there, but you always have to keep trying.
That practice that gets you close. Never quite get mastery because there's always something new. I'm going to go ahead and start my screen. This is a high-level map that we use to communicate a lot of information, and we're going to unpack it over the course of the first 10 or 15 minutes. This is a path to agility map. Let's talk a little bit about what is on here and what path to agility is. It's a platform for guiding change agents anywhere in this system as they work with, as we mentioned before, teams, systems, orgs to continuously improve. You'll see on the left-hand side some of the key features that support that. Loops within loops, assessments, capabilities, prioritization, actions, metrics, and reports. And we'll give you a high-level view of some of those features as we go along. In the middle, you see a map with some classic coloring schemes. This is a high-level view of data over time of a particular organization. At the top here, you can see that they've been gathering data over multiple quarters. And the map allows you to visualize things with trend lines. Along the top are what we call stages, and along the sides are layers, and we're going to talk about each of these individually. Brad, let's you and I do some ping-ponging. I'll talk about the first two stages, you get the next two, and then I'll do the next one. So the very first stage of any change initiative is really alignment. Align the initiative with measurable goals, we call them business outcomes, and a clear roadmap of where we want to go next. So if you don't know where you're going, anywhere will do. Align allows you to head in some direction, but because we're in complexity, you're going to adjust as you go. The next stage, and they aren't clean lines between them, we call learn. Here we're establishing foundational practices, typically related to Agile and a framework, and a culture of learning. And this culture of learning unlocks empowerment at the team level and the team of teams level to take ownership in their work and process. You've heard the people closest to the problem should be the best ones to help solve it. And so these foundational practices combined with a culture of learning begin to unlock that, which leads to the next stage. Brad?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with Virginia Satir's change curve, you might notice that when an organization goes through change, there's usually a dip in performance. There's that messy, chaotic, uncomfortable stage where we're learning new practices. That's the learn stage that Andy just referred to. But that third stage, predict, is the point where you're emerging from that chaos and getting to a place of stability. You've integrated your new practices. You've solidified maybe different team structures. You've maybe established different metrics, and those are something that you've gotten used to now. So the predict stage is where you've reached a place of stability after the chaos.
What comes next?
And next would be the accelerate stage. And this is going to be our focus today. This transition from that stable, predictable state where you might be saying, yeah, we got these agile practices down. We've got a predictable cadence and pace of delivery. Things are running smoothly. Then the question becomes, how do you build on that to get to a higher level of performance? This is where I see a lot of organizations today. They've done some type of agile adoption, agile transformation. They've gotten to a place of stability, but then they often struggle to get to that next level of performance.
Yeah, and that'll be the heart of today's conversation. We won't talk much about the fifth stage called adapt. This is where organizational wide agility is embraced to quickly respond to market demands. What that means is very contextual, depends on your market, your org. But having that goal in mind helps move things along from predict to accelerate so that you can get to adapt. Let's take a look next at the horizontal swim lanes, if you will. I'm going to start at the bottom. It's the easiest one. It's often the place where many change initiatives start. It's the team. The team is the smallest unit within Path to Agility. We don't break things down into individual contributors. We talk about a team. In many of your contexts, it could be a development squad. It could be a small department or a functional group. And typically it's, up to a dozen people. The key point of teamwork, it's not a working group, it's a group of people who are working collectively to meet some shared objectives. And for this to happen, they're taking on, as we said, new roles, new practices, to move along the change curve to get from predictable to accelerate. And we'll dive into team in a little bit more, but let's talk about team of teams. Brad, what we call
Yes, so that middle swim lane you're looking at across the map, we call that the system level. Essentially, this is for teams of teams. This could be one particular product line that requires multiple interdependent teams to deliver. It could be a value stream in your overall product delivery. So this is, again, a group of teams working together closely to achieve a particular outcome.
And then the next level is a collection of systems. Depending on the scale of your organization, it could be one system maps to an org. Oftentimes it is I don't want to use the word silo, but a vertical within an enterprise. And we have the ability to roll up orgs into the enterprise. So it's a structured collection of systems, again, working towards a common goal of objectives. Could be a division within an enterprise. And here we're looking at leadership mindsets, visibility, and alignment and measurement. Let's take a look at some of the details that make up the team. So we've looked at columns and swim lanes, and each of these squares, let's pick one here, is an agile outcome. And that outcome is powered by capabilities, and those capabilities have a set of practices that help drive it. So let me summarize that again. The outcome is the ultimate impact or the newly achieved results that come from capabilities that have been enabled by practices, something we do. Oftentimes, many focus on just the practice and they forget the why. Why do we do a daily tag up? Why do we do a periodic retrospective? Well, those are practices that drive some capability that drive towards a measurable outcome. So here we're taking a look at predictable delivery cadence. Who doesn't want predictability? So that you can begin to accelerate. And you can see it's made up of several capabilities. And we also have individual team level data. So we can look at that team level data in many different ways. Here we expand the swim lane and we see it. And over on the right, we see a summary. What this allows us to do is look at patterns and also identify outliers for knowledge sharing. So let's take a look at something like limiting WIP. So here, this is a capability that's made up by a certain set of practices. We call them acceptance criteria. They, just like in a user story, there's a binary. Either you're doing it or you're not. And teams can pause and reflect on a cadence, monthly, maybe quarterly, depends on the speed of change within an org system and team, and look at this and go, are we doing these things? And team 1A can look at it and say, we're actually missing quite a bit. We're 25% of this. We do some of these things, but we don't. So we can now create action items to drive change through our team and set up something like, let's put the WIP limits on a dashboard so we can talk about it at a daily basis. That brings us to looking at maybe some system level stuff in a moment. So this view, as you can see, there's a lot of stuff in here. And the idea is it's a sense-making tool. Where are we? What are our trends? I'll toggle trend lines. You can see them hopefully on the graph. There's enough contrast. What's happening in teams, rolling up of teams. And then ultimately, this powers what business outcomes are we driving for? If we're driving for predictability, the items that are highlighted here are heavily correlated. They are necessary, but not sufficient to drive predictability. If you want to go fast, these are the things that you need. And you can put metrics in place to measure some of these things. And we'll cover some of that in Brad's case studies. Brad, you want to switch screen shares or you want me to keep driving as you talk a little bit about some of the system level stuff?
Why don't we switch over? I'll
Okay.
jump in and kind of talk about that transition from the predict stage over to accelerate. Now that you gave a great overview of the structure there, the map view.
Yep. And while we're switching screens, Rez, are there any questions that have come up that are relative? I see one from Greg about.
Yeah, there's a couple from Greg. I think we can wait till the end to cover those.
Yep.
All right. Well, in that case, I'll carry on. So now you should be seeing a very similar view to what Andy shared. The colors here are what you might expect, kind of green, yellow to red to indicate how well is the organization or team or system performing in each of these Agile outcomes. And what I've represented here is what it might look like for an organization that is solidly at the predict stage. You notice in our first 3 stages, align, learn, and predict, most of those boxes are green. And if you can see the little percent numbers in the little black pill-shaped corner of each box, you'll see numbers 80%, 90%. So again, this might be a good indicator that your organization has achieved that predict stage. But if you look beyond that into the accelerate stage, you see all red, which means, hey, we've got a gap. We have an opportunity as an organization here to get to that next level of performance. So I'm going to drill into a couple of the Agile outcomes here and share a little bit of a case study around how I've used Path to Agility and how I've translated some of the capabilities and practices here to real world implementation. So I'm going to start with this box in the accelerate stage called sustaining improvement. So again, we would call this one of the Agile outcomes. So to move from that predictable, stable, sort of comfortable state, maybe you've kind of hit a plateau as an organization. You saw some improvement with your Agile practices, but you've hit a plateau. When we're looking to the accelerate stage, what we're looking at is how do we break through that plateau and get to the next level? One of the things that is identified here is this outcome of sustaining improvement. We want to continue to see improvement. We want to avoid plateauing here. Now, this is an organizational level Agile outcome. So this is something that senior leadership would be involved in. In fact, it would be critical that we have ongoing engagement of senior leaders to continue creating the culture and building the environment where we can see ongoing improvement. And you'll see on the right sidebar that popped out when I clicked on this Agile outcome here, 4 capabilities, and I'll talk about a few of them. The first one you'll see within sustaining improvement is something called coaching capability. So here I'll be sharing, again, some of my experiences from an organization that I've worked with, just a little bit about the organization. This is the online or digital marketing group within a very large technology company. So the company overall has they're a Fortune 500 company. They've got a large portfolio of technology products. The part of the organization that I'll be sharing here is their digital marketing part of the organization. So sustaining improvement, coaching capability. What we had established previously was a group of Scrum Masters, one for each team. Every team within this organization had a Scrum Master. Now, most of them were new to that role. So in order to get to the next level, what we offered was a series of trainings for all Scrum Masters to teach them coaching skills. So we get all the Scrum Masters some training around coaching skills. To further that, we also established a community of practice for those Scrum Masters. And I think this one touches on the next capability, continuing education. So once or twice a month, all the Scrum Masters are meeting. They're continuing to practice the craft of coaching that they learned about in the training. They're getting support from me and my colleagues as external coaches for them as well. So we're making sure that we're building on what they've learned as Scrum Masters and continuing to build their skills as coaches for their teams there. Let's jump into one more capability here. The last one is culture of continuous improvement. So in this one, we had established an Agile community of practice, and this was open to anyone in the organization, any practitioner, regardless of their role within teams. And we had really good participation. When this organization got to that predict stage, we kind of saw this group get a little bit stale. We didn't have as much active participation. It didn't have visibility so much with the leadership team. So we kind of rebooted this construct of the Agile community of practice. And we did that by re-engaging some of the senior leadership. They supported one person to really be driving this community and facilitating that group, and kind of giving it a new life, bringing in new energy, and making sure it had that explicit connection with overall organizational goals. So leadership got more involved to make sure that there was a great alignment with what the overall organizational goals were here. One example of something that came out of this is planning, and capacity planning in particular. So the teams have all been using story pointing, as many of you might be familiar with, to do capacity planning. But one of the things that emerged from the community of practice was an experiment around using flow metrics rather than story pointing to try to have a better and more efficient way of doing capacity planning. In fact, that's an ongoing experiment now. There are a couple of teams who are using both approaches in parallel and comparing how well those two work. So that's an example of how we've been able to create this culture of continuous improvement within the organization by really putting some focus into the engagement within the community of practice there. Let's see. So there's a couple of examples of things we've done at that organizational level in order to move into the accelerate stage there. Another one here, and I'll maybe use this to highlight once again the business outcomes that Andy talked about earlier. Let's say that one of your goals as an organization is to deliver faster. In other words, to increase speed of delivery. Here, when I highlight this outcome of speed up here at the top of the map, notice that we're getting a focus on those Agile outcomes that most correlate with that goal. And one of those, not surprisingly, is faster time to value. And this is here a system level outcome, meaning this is something that we work on at the level of teams, which again, this could be a product line. This could be a value stream. It even could potentially be some major initiative that your organization is undertaking that involves multiple teams that are interdependent. So when I click on that box here, we'll see two different capabilities listed: optimizing the whole and minimum viable delivery. It's probably also important here to note that even in the prior stages within Path to Agility, there's some additional capabilities that relate to speed as well. But sort of prior to this point in my organization's journey, They had implemented a lot of the standard Agile practices that you're familiar with, and
Yep.
they'd actually achieved some really good results. So, in fact, cycle time, they managed to reduce cycle time by 38% over about a 9-month period. And over that same time frame, they also improved quality. They reduced defect rates by about 47%. So they'd seen some good improvement, but again, they kind of reached the point where things had plateaued. They weren't seeing continued improvement in some of those metrics. So where do we go from there? I'll show, well, one of the practices specifically that we introduced at this point was WIP limits. So initially with Scrum practices, we didn't have explicit WIP limits, but we merged in this important Kanban practice, kind of layered it on top of the Scrum practices to give teams that additional discipline to really make sure they were focused and not letting work pile up within the teams. We also took a more detailed look at some metrics around where was time being consumed within their workflow. So I just shared here some data that we collected. Once again, this is a marketing organization, so the type of work they do are pretty sophisticated marketing campaigns, again, for a whole portfolio of technology products. And we kind of zoomed in to the cycle time data to try to understand, well, where is it in the overall end-to-end flow where we see things getting slowed down? So the vertical bars here represent the amount of time it takes to get work done at various steps along the way. And what this revealed pretty quickly is where were the opportunities to further improve that cycle time. And you'll see a pretty distinct section here over on the left side, sort of the earlier stages in the process is where most of that room for improvement was. So this helped us to identify some initiatives and some experiments that we're currently running to try to reduce these upfront stages to improve that cycle time even further after that, pretty substantial improvement they saw early on. We're now looking at even greater improvement there by knowing where those opportunities lie there. I'll jump back into the map here. And maybe I'll turn things over to Andy. I think Andy, you have a related feature that will.
Yeah, so let me go ahead and screen share again. And I'll bring up something that just came out of beta that's a good follow to what you just talked about. So, it's wonderful to see that the theory works, right? You support the coaches at the team level to continuously improve. They support the teams. They start looking at actionable metrics that make sense. And we've begun to build out the capacity to capture that in this tool so that you have a dashboard with everything in one place. I'll go back to the team level example that I was talking about before. Again, predictable delivery cadence is the Agile outcome they're looking for. Again, there's no point in trying to accelerate. Imagine you're on a motorized vehicle. If you can't turn, stop, and control it, or in Brad's case, downhill skiing, you need to be predictable before you go down that double black diamond, right? So no point in accelerating. So predictable delivery cadence, we looked at and we said, limiting WIP. Yeah, we hear about that a lot. How are we doing there? Not so great. So Team 1A took it upon themselves to do some action items. Well, let's set up a WIP dashboard, see how much we have in process. They didn't get very far because they were so concerned about getting the limits right. And one of the coaches said, why don't we take the Fight Club rules of let's manage WIP without talking about WIP. And people said, what are you talking about? Well, a leading indicator is work item age. And they're like, what? When we accept it into our queue as a team, we start keeping time. And so we set up a metric that all teams in this system can use. The elapsed time from when the team accepted it, not when the ticket was created or put into the backlog, but when it was ready and pulled in, when work started, whatever that means is defined locally, and the current time. And for this team, it was with story tasks and bugs, and it was just number of days. And they looked at it as part of the daily tag up. What is the oldest item on the board? What do we need to do to keep it moving? And so here's a story of two teams. Team 1A had some data, and they started out with an average age of 12, which wasn't too shabby. And they continuously worked on it by focusing every day on the oldest item on the board to bring it down to 5 within, this is about a quarter, 1 to 6 months. And at the same time, their score for predictable delivery cadence and predictable throughput climbs. There's a correlation and hopefully a causality between these two. The other team, not quite as a substantial increase, but doing the same thing with constant daily focus on work item age, and they are getting WIP control for free. And you can see what happens with their outcome and capability scores that is driving predictability. So we've added that in recently. There's a whole library of metrics that are available. We've started with sort of the classic ones, the DORA metrics for driving speed, flow efficiency, hard about customer satisfaction, and we'll continue to expand our library as we go. I think that wraps up just about all the presentation stuff we had. Brad, am I missing anything? A few more stories? Otherwise, what do you got?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think that's interesting to also talk about in terms of the case study that I talked about is maybe what are some of the ongoing challenges? We discussed a few things that they're really focused on now to make sure they're in that continuous improvement mode. One is building Scrum Masters coaching skills. Second one is having a really engaged and active Agile community of practice, one that's supported by leadership. In fact, leadership is coordinating with that COP as really an escalation point for systemic problems. So when practitioners from any team recognize a problem, they can bring that challenge to the community of practice, run experiments around it, and give it visibility within the leadership team and get support from leaders for helping remove obstacles there. The third thing I showed there is by really understanding the cycle time in more depth gives us the ability to focus on improvement where it's most needed, which stages or which steps in the process are causing the most friction or the largest delays in getting work moving forward. So a few of the challenges, one of those is that upfront part of the process where we saw a much larger amount of time being required. Certainly that there are some actions and experiments now to chip away at those, but those have been tough things to tackle. A lot of that involves collaboration with stakeholders. They've got product and marketing folks who have a lot of opinions about how all these marketing campaigns should be done. And that upfront process of really defining the content and strategy for these campaigns gets pretty tricky. So that's an ongoing challenge. One other thing that we have that we've struggled with a bit is earlier in the journey, we had a dedicated group of leaders that was focused on the Agile transformation. At this point, it's more just the way that they're doing business now. So it's not really viewed as a separate initiative. And one of the challenges there is keeping these efforts visible to that group of leaders. So one of the things we're doing there is they have monthly leadership operational meetings, and a big part of that is bringing in some of these key metrics to share with the leadership team so they can see also where are the bottlenecks, where are the opportunities for improvement, and what support do we need from you, senior leaders, to help move these numbers in the right direction.
I find that the map really helps in those conversations because it bubbles up and aggregates multiple teams, multiple systems, and can show you some hotspots. I'm curious, Brad, about the slope of change along align, learn, predict, and accelerate. Is it the same slope, or does it increase, or does it decrease as you move through the stages? What's been your experience?
What I typically see is during the learn stage, we see a lot of improvement. That's where teams and systems and organizations are learning and putting into practice new techniques, new practices like Scrum and Kanban, and they may be changing team structures. They might be introducing different metrics and different ways of tracking work. So I see a pretty high rate of change there. In the predict phase, I'll often see that start to level off. And this is, I think, something I've seen repeatedly in a lot of organizations. You get to the stage where people are saying, hey, these Agile practices are working for us. We saw some improvement. We're going to declare victory and say, we're good. It's all good, right? But of course, one of the core principles in agility is that you have to be continuously improving. So you've got to be really cautious about that complacency that tends to happen once these new practices now become the status quo. I often tend to see that plateau happen there, and it's hard to build the momentum for that next step to the next level of performance.
Yeah, that corresponds with a lot of the data that we see and aggregate. Quite rapid change in align and learn begins to slow down and predict. When you hit accelerate and adapt, you hit the really gnarly spots of, pick your debt metaphor, technical debt, organizational debt, old practices, financial, HR sort of things begin to be the next constraint to getting through accelerate quickly and into adapt.
Yeah, for sure. The early stages usually that's where we take care of that low-hanging fruit. We can get those quick wins. But yeah, as the engine becomes finer and finer tuned along the way, it just becomes exponentially harder to get that next increment of improvement, whether it's an improvement in speed, improvement in quality, improvements in innovation. It gets harder to squeeze out that next level, but it's important that you keep going, because I guarantee your competitors are doing that. And if you're not improving, you're dying, essentially. Maybe very slowly, but you've always got to be improving to be competitive.
Do not get complacent.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thank you for that real world perspective. We're going to dive into some of the questions and see if we have actual answers. That would be the Q+A portion of the show.
Yeah.
So Greg posed a question, and I'll just read it and then we'll refine it. If the team is the atomic unit, how does path to agility work in situations where teams are dynamically formed and reformed? In other words, they are not long-standing teams. So, it depends on what long-standing means. If you're talking weekly, bless your heart. Well, I won't speak for Brad, but I personally am a fan of dynamic reteaming. Done consciously because things change, so should the teams. You might as well get good at it. And there's lots of patterns out there. There's a wonderful book, I think it's on version 2 by Heidi Helfen, where she talks about different patterns that are available to you. So how does P to A handle that? If it is some of the patterns of people are just lifting in of an exchange of people, the team, the atomic unit really isn't being created or destroyed. So that's built into it. When you add teams, obviously they are starting at the beginning. So Peter, you would add a new team, it would be team formed, and you would see a change in aggregate scores. And as a result, you can see the impact that has on your metrics. Is it improving or harming? So there's the ability to gather that data, add more teams, assess those teams, and see the impact it has on key business outcomes. Brad, anything you would add about dynamic reteaming in a healthy way, not every 2 weeks,
Yeah.
blow them up and start them again?
Yeah. I think that's, as you said, I think that's got to be a very deliberate choice. I feel like teams need to have enough stability, enough of a long-term objective that they can focus on that. And yeah, sometimes needs shift, priorities shift, product portfolios shift, and some team shifts can be healthy in that case. So yeah, try to find that right balance, I would say there.
Yeah. Can you see Q&As? Brad, you
Yeah,
want to pick one?
yeah, I could take see Greg's question around essentially how does path to agility help with that principle of simplicity? Maybe I'll just do another brief screen share. I'll highlight one or two elements of path to agility that I think directly get to that. And the one I'll really zoom in on immediately is this one right here at the system level called complexity reduced. And as I dive into that one, we'll see a few capabilities here that go along with that, related to our previous question: multi-team stability, reduced dependencies, handling of unplanned work, and multi-team synchronization. So these are all capabilities that can help with reducing complexity. There's probably a few bits also here in the earlier stages, also at this system or team of teams level. I'd say even going all the way back to the first stage of align, this capability of value alignment is really around how do we define value and value delivery systems. This is essentially a lot of concepts from value stream mapping that find their way into these capabilities here.
Thank you. Another question. Is there a way to use P to A to further technical excellence? Keep your screen up because I think the answer is yes. As is there a way to use P to A to further technical excellence of the organization and how it's trending? In my mind, one key indicator of technical and competency and excellence in software, so let's keep it that, is the ability to release continuously. And so if you click into that one, Brad, you can look at some of the things. Are we able to automate deployment? Do we have feature flagging? Do we have quality that when we ship it, we know we have canaries and we know what's going on. So there are capabilities and practices that point back to technical excellence. And one of my favorites, obviously, is CI/CD. There's other ones related to quality as well, and that comes out in cycle time and some of the other ones. Ability to forecast is another big one, right? So there's quite a bit built in that point to technical excellence. Given the potential number of tech stacks, we don't get very specific. So we're more agnostic as what would you observe that would imply excellence from a technical standpoint. Any other questions? Go ahead and type them up, add them in. We still have some time left. New features coming out. Reports beta. I see you have it, Brad, so you might click that while we're waiting for a few more questions down at the bottom. Let's hope that demo days. So as teams begin to assess their capabilities, that's not the end. That is just a data point. As I said at the outset, it's sense making. Where are we? What are the patterns? And then what are we going to do about it? So pick a team and generate a report. Hopefully you have some data and generate a report.
I don't have a lot of data here. I don't think. We'll see what happens. We might have shift over to your screen if you've got better data than I have.
Yeah.
And
then scroll the PDF.
Yeah,
you should be able to scroll down. So this is a high-level summary of this particular team and how they're doing. And you can see trends over time, and you can see where there are rooms for improvement. Given this, and then we can overlay one of the business outcomes, we can begin to prioritize what to work on next. So if you click the prioritization function on the left-hand nav, and team one. And so let's say we're going to change a business outcome. So you were looking at speed. And based on the current state, these are the top contenders. Now they might say, 75 is good enough. We don't recommend 100, but we say, 75, it's your call. It's nice to get to 80, 85 and call it good enough, move on. So the algorithm says, consider these and decide, but look at what's below. And so in this case, if you want to go fast and you don't have automated deployment and feature flags and you build it, you own it, you're going to accelerate right into a bad spot. And so if these are long lead capabilities to enable, you might want to shift left and get them started earlier. So you begin to get a view of where we are, where we want to go, and then you plan your next continuous improvement experiment. And then you get your feedback loops through metrics. What do we mean by speed? And it might be average age of a feature from inception to customer feedback being received. If it's currently 15 months, what would it take to cut it in half and half again? And that becomes your feedback loop.
And if I could just highlight here, this is really, I think, a really great feature within Path to Agility. Notice that we're targeting a particular business outcome or business goal. In this case, it's speed. So what the framework is doing here is it's correlating and finding for us the capabilities that are most highly coordinated with this outcome of speed. It's not just randomly picking things from all over the framework. So this really helps you to focus and figure out where can we have an impact if speed is our goal.
I'll give you a little insight into the secret sauce without giving too much away. There's multiple weighting factors. Brad mentioned one, the business outcome, right? The other things are your current score, obviously, and then finally predecessors and successors. So for example, you'll notice that test automation is ranked above automated deployment because it would be kind of painful to automate deployment without good test coverage. If you could ship it well and break it well, then you're testing in prod. Good luck there. We've been there and done that. Just don't ship on a Friday afternoon. Rez, are there any other questions that we've missed? If not, we will hand the talking stick back to you.
Yeah, I think y'all have answered the questions in Q&A, but I do have a question for you, Andy. You mentioned DORA metrics. What is a DORA metric?
I'm reminded of a joke. It's about when the kids watched the Dora cartoons. It's not that.
Okay.
So there was a wonderful book, Jess Humble, Gene Kim, and Dr. Oh, forgive me, I'm forgetting your name. I'm gonna have to look it up. Accelerate, that talked about the state of CI/CD, and DORA. Brad, you gonna help me out, or do I have to look it up real quick? What does it stand
Oh
for?
gosh, I'm drawing a bit of a blank. It's not coming to me.
All right. Well, let me
I have to use the Google.
use the Google while Res and Accelerate. It's
Yeah.
it's a wonderful book. It's probably has its roots, or Google bought it. Um, Accelerate book, Dora. You
Well,
should have prepped me for that.
While Andy frantically Googles, I didn't mean to stump him on this question. Just wanted to shout out that if you want to try Path to Agility Navigator, you can do so for free for 30 days. As hopefully what Brad and Andy have shown y'all, it is a continuous improvement tool. And so it allows teams to kind of get on the path to continuous improvement with features that allow you to assess, prioritize, analyze, and then finally act so that y'all can get better. Again, follow the QR code. You can try it free for 30 days. And Andy, did you ever figure out what DORA means?
Well, I remembered Dr. Nicole Forsgren's name. The book is Accelerate. Can I put it into chat for everybody to see?
Yeah.
Or you'll send it out later.
Yep.
And
I will send out the recording as well as both of the books that you mentioned during the webinar. And if y'all have any follow-up questions, please feel free to email Andy or Brad. You can also reach us at info@pathtoagility.com.
thank you for saving me, Greg. DevOps research and assessment. So the Accelerate group, the wonderful group of Forsgren, Humble, and Gene, and a few more authors, took it upon themselves to gather a lot of data and look for correlations. And they came back with a key set of metrics that were highly correlated with accelerating performance in multiple markets. So if you haven't read the book, grab it. And those metrics that are listed in P to A are easy to follow. Just hard to remember what DORA stands for.
Yeah.
DevOps research
And
assessment.
assessments. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank y'all for joining us. Brad, thank you. You were great as always. Andy, thank you. And we will see y'all soon.
Thank you all.
Bye.